In today's show, we're talking Sacramento Kings. They did it. They made the playoffs, but what now? We'll figure that out, figure out what happened, figure out what might happen. We'll talk about it all. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and I am the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter as always at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com and the promo code is Locked On. Thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free and we are available on all platforms. So we're going to talk Sacramento Kings. A couple of things have happened in the NBA though recently. I won't discuss the Ja Morant thing now because tomorrow's show is the Grizzlies season review. So yes, we all saw the Ja Morant thing, and if you haven't seen the Ja Morant thing, I'll talk about it tomorrow. The Sixers lost to the Celtics in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference semifinals. So we've got the matchups done, Celtics-Miami and Denver-Lakers. I am going to choose Boston in 7, and I'm going to choose Denver in 6. That's my matchup. We'll see how that goes. And of course, the Suns fired Monty Williams. Pretty crazy, I think. But there is definitely new owner syndrome going on there. We already saw Ishbia insert himself into the Jokic situation with the ball and the flops and the push and all that sort of stuff. We saw him insert himself into the Kevin Durant trade and just override the deal to get Kevin Durant in. I don't think they're going to be able to get a better coach than Monty Williams. Monty Williams isn't without blame for the Suns. We'll do Suns stuff, I think, later this week or maybe next week. The relationship with DeAndre Ayton was terrible, clearly. Not absolving blame of Ayton. Clearly, he's at fault too. The relationship with Jay Crowder stunk pretty obviously as well. Williams did a lot of good things, but he's not without fault. I wouldn't have fired him, but the new owner has no allegiance to these guys. He didn't hire them. He didn't hire Monty Williams. So that statement coming out that's saying that James Jones made the call is clear garbage. He didn't. And the interesting thing in the Woj article saying that Matt Ishbia has taken full control of basketball operations was very intriguing. And then, of course, on an edit of that article, Woj took that out. Now, did he take it out because it was false, or did he take it out because Ishbia said, don't write that stuff or else you won't get any access? I don't know. But it's definitely removed. It was there, and it's not there anymore. If I was the Suns, I'd be way more interested in... I would have fired James Jones before Monty Williams. The whole James Jones approach of we don't care about scouting, we don't care about the draft, we put no effort into it whatsoever, we don't care about G League, development, roster, young players, prospects. That's not a real sustainable model. I would have gone a different direction there. I just don't see how you get a better guy in than Williams in most circumstances. Now, of course, they might take Nick Nurse, or they might think that Budenholzer is a better coach. That can all be debatable. But there are at least strong options out there. It's still a curious move, and we'll talk more Suns. I just wanted to address that now. I don't think I wouldn't have fired Williams. I would have been more inclined to make a change and fire Jones. Or if I was going to do it, I would fire them both together and get new decision makers in. But I don't think that this situation with Williams deserved him being fired, although the writing was on the wall. But whether the writing on the wall should have been there or not is a different story. I don't think it should have been. That's enough of the Phoenix Suns, because we're here to talk Sacramento Kings. So, Warnie.
Let's get it on, Gilly.
All right. Let me ask you a question. Was the Sacramento Kings season a success? Yes, right? Has to be. Has to be. No playoffs for 16 seasons, 17 years. They made it. They finished third in the Western Conference. They won 48 games, 34 losses. They had 2 All-NBA players. They had the clutch player of the year. They had the coach of the year. They had the executive of the year. Everything was coming up Sacramento. And if there was a category for marketing, gimmick's the wrong word, but marketing innovation of the year, they win it clearly. The Beam, unbelievable. So much fun, so much excitement. That team was awesome. And I still am skeptical. And I know you can have trades that are win-win. And I'm going to go back to this trade. And I probably won't talk about it for another few years after this. We'll go back to the Sabonis-Halliburton trade. You can have win-win trades. And probably this is what this is. Because they wanted to make the playoffs. Their stated goal for years and years and years was, we want to make the playoffs. They traded for Domantas Sabonis, and they made the playoffs. Part of the reason why I was down on that trade is, Halliburton was a young player who is on a rookie contract, who I think he's going to have multiple All-Star and All-NBA seasons and will lead the team well in the future, and his game translates pretty well to the playoffs. And my problem was Sabonis is probably going to get them to a better regular season record now. He is an impending free agent coming up next season, and I really, really, really worry about how bad it's going to be in the playoffs. And he got them there. That's a win. But the problem that I had with the trade was very clearly exposed in the playoffs, where this is not a player, I don't think, that leads you to winning basketball. So that's what I say. Like, is it a success? Yes. They did what they needed to do. Was the trade a win for Sacramento? Yes, it was. But when we assess this in 2026 or 2025, I'm not sure that it will be. And I still probably wouldn't have done the deal myself. The other thing with this Kings team is there were a lot of interesting things that happened and a lot of great stuff, great offense, all that sort of stuff. Best offense in the NBA. 25th best defense. That's the worry. Right? Plus 2.4 net rating, 8th in the NBA. Really, really good this team was. But my concern with everything about this team, and there's, as soon as they were eliminated by the Warriors in that Game 7 on their home court, as soon as they were eliminated, man, this Kings team's got such a bright future, going to develop from here. They had one of the best, and I don't know if this is 100% accurate or not. Like, you're going to use these terms very liberally, because I don't know this to be true, but I know this to be true. They had the best injury record of any team this season, and one of the best injury records of any team, I think, in recent memory. Nobody missed time. And people will say, well, Fox got hurt in the playoffs. He hurt his thumb. True. Sabonis played through a fracture on his thumb. True. But nobody missed games. Every rotation player basically played all the way through. And you'll see that when we go through individual players and their games played and their totals rankings versus their per game ranking. This is a team that got by having significant continuity and no one missing time. And you look at all the other teams around them, Phoenix, the Clippers, the Lakers, the Grizzlies, nearly everyone missed tons of games. This team did not miss any games really at all. And that helped them get this record. But how do you get better from that? What do you do next? They can't play more games. You can't hope for better health. That's definitely not going to happen. You can't get better health. So you're going to hope that, we'll talk about it all with the individual players as well. You got to hope that there's just big improvement because you can't get better luck. Their best lineup for the season was a plus 29.7 rating. Interesting lineup with Fox, Huerter, Barnes, and Sabonis, 4 starters, and then Monk in there in place of Keegan Murray. And we saw Mike Brown go to that lineup quite a bit. We saw it go to the playoffs quite a bit. We saw that whenever Murray wasn't feeling it, that he would get taken out. It's not a surprise to see that. Had a plus 30 net rating over the season. And in fact, their 2 best lineups didn't have Keegan Murray in it. We'll talk about him a little bit later. But it's not a surprise to see that lineup be so good. The other thing I talk about this Kings team is they've got $22 million projected in cap space, according to Spotrac. But look at all these guys that are unrestricted free agents. Let's start with the pencil Harrison Barnes. Barnesy. He's an unrestricted free agent. A starter. You can say that, like, in the end, in the playoffs, he got cooked, really, didn't he? They dropped his minutes back and he struggled. Trey Lyles played backup center, backup power forward all season. Terence Davis, a guy that stepped in and played along the wing whenever they needed it. Alex Len, who took over their backup center role towards the end of the season. These are all unrestricted free agents. They've got Kessler Edwards with the team option. I'm pretty sure they'll pick that up. Chimezie Metu, the team's backup center at the start of the season, is an unrestricted free agent. There's also Matty Dellavedova as well, who I'm almost certain is going to come back and play in Australia. I doubt he'll be playing on this team because Mike Brown went into the season and go, right, I need my guy from Cleveland, Matty Dellavedova. I need my Chima Maniki, who I coached for Nigeria. And he just brought in a bunch of blokes that he brought in KZ Okpala, guys that I just, he had coached before to set some sort of a foundation, I'm guessing some sort of a culture, which worked, but they're not going to be around. So they've got big question marks. Like, do they bring back Barnes? The four interesting ones there, I think, well, three at least, is Barnes, Lyles, Terence Davis, and maybe Alex Len. Maybe. But if you lose both Lyles and Len, and Metu, which is possible, then you run into a little bit of a depth problem, don't you? You lose Barnes, then someone's got to elevate up. It probably ends up being someone like Malik Monk, but then your bench takes a hit. There are a lot of questions here. This is the biggest, I think, unrestricted free agent list we've had through the 19 of these team reviews we've done. It's a big list, and they are rotation pieces. So there's a question mark there about what Monty McNair does. In the draft, they have pick 24. According to my mock draft ADP, that would be Derek Whitehead. Derek Whitehead is a player who I have higher than this. And we're going to start draft stuff during this week, which is going to be exciting. But he is suffering from a broken foot at the moment. Doesn't look like it'll be a problem moving forward, but that's obviously, broken feet are always a concern. They've got 2 second-round picks, pick 38, which would be Amari Bailey, and pick 54, which is Dylan Mitchell. I'm not really a big Dylan Mitchell fan. Amari Bailey is an interesting guy, but early second-round picks probably on this team doesn't play a huge amount. The first-round guy might, but who knows? It's pick 24. You don't expect huge amounts out of that. Let's answer a question from Erikos Kartmanakis, which I'm sure is not a real name. Hey Josh, do you think the Kings are going to sign Sasha Vezenkov? And if so, how big of a part do you see him being for them? This is a really good question because Sasha Vezenkov was a draft pick of the Brooklyn Nets 3 years ago, pick 57 in the draft. He got traded from the Nets to maybe it was 4 years ago, Nets to the Cavs as part of the Jarrett Allen, James Harden deal. And then the Kings got him off the Cavs for some random pick or some random deal where there was a swap of second-round draft picks last draft. So he ended up with the Kings. Now, who is Sasha Vezenkov? A 6'9", 27-year-old power forward who played his Cypriot. He's a Cypriot. He plays in... he's from Cyprus, but he's Cypriot, Bulgarian. Anyway, plays for Olympiakos. What did he do this season? He played 27 minutes a night and averaged 17 points. He shot 39% from 3 on 4.5 attempts per game. He hit 56% of his field goals. He's a good free throw shooter. He grabbed 7 rebounds, 2 assists, a steal. Not really many block numbers. That's a pretty standard thing for a European big man. In EuroLeague play, the highest level of play, he averaged 17 points. He shot 39% from 3. He averaged 7 rebounds. He did exactly the same in EuroLeague than he did playing in the G League, which is a hugely great sign. He is he is in his prime, and I do think he is going to come over. He would be the guy that would come over, I would think, and I would be pretty okay with moving on from Trey Lyles. I'm not a big Trey Lyles guy, but if Trey Lyles moved on or they wanted to move on, like he would slot in and he would play the Trey Lyles role. And if they decided to move on from Harrison Barnes, I don't think that it might be rough early on, but he could be a starter. I would think he's not quite as good of a level as what Nemanja Bjelica was playing over in Europe. Bjelica was an MVP over there. But a similar type of player. I think a stretch 4 sort of a guy, good shooter, good rebounder, good scorer, steps up in big competitions. He'd be at least, I think, a rotation player. So that gives them a little bit of hope if he does come over, which I do think he is. If Barnes or Lyles or Len or Metu or these guys move on, he should be a rotation piece. Old mate, Sasha Vezenkov. So we'll see what happens with that. I am excited to see him come over. I'll be interested to see it. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks has got the $1 million daily Superflex promotion all through the NBA playoffs and the finals. Every day, one PrizePicks user will get a chance to become a millionaire. One entry placed after 8 a.m. Eastern will be randomly selected each day, and that person gets a 6-pick flex with the following payouts. You get all 6 right on PrizePicks and you get $1 million. You get 5 right, you get $80,000. Or you get 4 out of the 6 right and you get $16,000. And they're just player projections. They're just individual stats and you go more or less. Don't go 6 overs. Don't do that. But you get individual points or threes or rebounds or steals or whatever. Choose them, put them together, and every day one person gets selected to have a chance at $1 million. It's daily fantasy, but it's daily fantasy made easy. You can do this in many different sports. You can do it for baseball, hockey, boxing, MMA, cricket, golf, PGA, of course, which is golf. You can do it for college sports. You can do it for disc golf. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com. In fact, go to prizepicks.com/million because that's where you got to get the full details, and that's where you opt in to be eligible for the $1 million entry. You can also get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, you get $50. Simple. Don't forget to enter the promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. All right, that will take us into talking about the players. Let's talk about the big fella, the big guy in the middle, Domantas Sabonis. I remember that in some mock drafts, I was taking him around 22, 23 and getting shit on a lot for it. That's fine. I thought he'd be around that mark, clearly, because I drafted him there. I didn't think he'd be this good. He was really, really strong in the regular season. I still don't know whether he was their best player. Fantasy, obviously he was. Real life, I'm not sure. But we also saw some big, big drops in production through the playoffs. 13th in category leagues, 5th in totals. And you're going to see that a lot with these teams, with all these players. Their totals rank is out of the arse. -1 rank, 15th. Points league rank, 14th. 5th in totals all across the board, ADP 24. He's 27. He's banging his prime. He played 79 games. Missed like 1 or 2 with that. Wasn't a full thumb fracture. It's an avulsion fracture where the ligament pulls a little bit of the corner of the bone off. And they're a pain in the ass. You can play through it, but they are a pain. 35 minutes, 21 usage, 19, 12, and 7, 0.8 steals, 0.5 blocks, 0.4 threes, 61, 74. I look at all of this, and it's really great. EPM plus 2.3, but Darko had him 101st. And you can see towards the end of the season, because Darko's there's got some playoff numbers involved, look at that drop. Things went really pear-shaped for Sabonis in the playoffs, and that has always been the problem. When you get to the playoffs, I don't know how you hang. And that's, again, back to why I didn't like the trade. But for us, for fantasy, we've got to look at what we do with him. There will be people that draft him in the first round next season based on totals. There will be do that. Look, and he was 13th per game, no problem. And you look at those numbers, 19, 12, and 7. I don't really see why any of it's changing. Will he play 35 minutes again? No reason he won't. Will he shoot 61%? That could fall away. Will he shoot 37% from 3? It doesn't really matter on the volume that he takes shots. They're so low. Will he shoot 74% from the line? Well, that's probably got a chance of being better versus being worse. So there's no reason he won't do what he did again. At least 2 more years, I would say, at this level of production. To me, he's a very, very clear second-round player. If you wanted to take him the turn, which is where he ranked this season, I don't see why he would fall off significantly from these numbers. Why would he stop rebounding? Why would he stop getting these assists? I don't see any of that changing. So it feels really rock solid. Nothing should change. Not major or anything. It could, but I don't really see anything change. The big thing I guess you watch is if the 61 field goals go to 57, which of course impacts points, and then you get a big drag in value and he becomes a 20th player or the 25th player, which is not a disaster if you pick him at 15, 16. It's not bad. His points graph, relatively consistent. Minutes, unbelievably consistent all through the season. That's that red line. Just the same all the way through. There's not really a huge amount to talk about Sabonis until we look over the EPM graph and you see towards the end of the season and you see that dotted line on the right-hand side of the screen. That's the playoffs. And yeah, it was bad, man. Like, this is, again, when we talk about this team, where do they go? How do they improve? How does it get better than what happened this season? I'm not saying it can't, but how does it get better? And how do you go further in the playoffs? The Sabonis question's going to become significant. And then, of course, his free agency coming up as well. But that's got to be a concern. He also, if you look over the regular season, his impact started to drop towards the end of the year as well. Still really good. Don't get me wrong, he was awesome. And I expect his fantasy numbers to be pretty strong all season. But there was definitely a dip as the season went on. Let's talk Darren Fox. Fox was awesome again this season. Actually, you know what? That's not right. Fox was awesome this season because he wasn't awesome last season. He struggled for the majority of the season and turned on about 3 weeks of good play towards the end of the season. But this year, he was. He was 38th in category leagues. He was 40th in -1. He was 30th in points leagues. His ADP was 46, so that's not that far off. 46 versus 38, no problem. He's 25. I think he's their best player. 73 games, 33 minutes, 30 usage. 30 usage is huge. 25 points, 4 threes, 6 assists, a steal, 1.6 triples, 51, 33, 78. The free throws are a little iffy. The three-point shooting's a little iffy. We know all of that. That's not a big surprise for us to see those numbers that way. But what he was able to do this season is be just unbelievable in terms of shooting. The shooting for Darren Fox was pretty crazy. His I don't know how even best to talk about what he was able to do because he started off unbelievably hot as well shooting, but to turn this level of efficiency was crazy. He shot, what did he shoot? 77% at the rim That was 100th percentile in the NBA. He shot 98th percentile on short mid-ranges. These are unbelievable numbers. He shot 93%, 93rd percentile, on all mid-ranges. His rim numbers prior to this season were 60, 63, 63, 69, 65, and he took it a full 12 percentage points better this season. That jumped his field goal percentage up to be 51%. And he was able to do it for big chunks of the season. Interestingly, he didn't take as many shots at the rim this season, which I won't say it's troubling, but it is a little bit of a concern that he's turned from a guy who was taking 20% of his shots from three and 50% of his shots from mid-range and 29% of his shots at the rim to a guy taking 25% from three and only 24% at the rim. So he went from a guy that was at the rim all the time, 29% versus 20 from three, versus a guy that then even those percentages and took only 25% of his shots, or took 25 from three, 24 at the rim, despite being awesome there, and settled a little bit more for mid-ranges. That's, I guess, a slight concern. He was able to jump his numbers up by being, I think we can say, the best guard finisher in the entire NBA and one of the best over the last 10 years. But one of my core tenets in projection and looking at players is like, if someone has an outlier number and you are number one in the league at that number, do not bank on that sticking or improving. So much like Sabonis, he played 73 games, which is not as high as Sabonis, still good. But that 51% could very easily become 49 if he doesn't get 77 at the rim anymore, if he goes back to 68, which I think has to be the expectation. You don't ever want to say, well, yeah, I expect this guy to finish better than prime Shaq at the rim. That's insane. He did it all season. He did it. But that as an ongoing thing is really, really tough to bank on. He was 2.8 on EPM, 41st in Darko. You can see his impact was amazing this season. He's really good. And he's going to be, I would guess, a third-round player. He'll go second in some situations, but there will be a problem that if that drops, his field goal percentage will drop. His free throws are already average, could drop off as well. The assists go through Sabonis, not through Fox, and he's not a big defensive stat generator. So there could be a problem where he becomes 55th instead of 38th. And then if you took him at 25, then you really get hurt. So I'm a little worried about that, Again, it's all about trying to work out best worst-case scenarios, how it can play out, how it will play out, and how we value this. Because everything just came together perfectly for Fox and this Kings team this season, and he did stuff that we just hadn't seen before. And that's always hard to put complete faith in. He could do it. Easily. He could be a 77% rim guy again, but if he's not, which is absolutely the overwhelmingly more likely outcome, then things drop off. His EPM graph is pretty solid. Like, he's a positive contributor. He was great in the playoffs. The thumb hurt him. No problem. Absolutely sure. That's all totally true. My worry is that rim finishing. Let's talk Fanapants. Kevin Huerter, who was acquired from the Hawks for the cost of a first-round pick. I didn't really love the trade, to be honest, for the Kings. I just thought, you're giving away a first-round pick. How confident are you that you're going to be good? I was wrong on that. Pretty clear because they were better. Huerter was solid, but he was also pretty inconsistent. We'll talk about that in a second. He was 109th in category leagues, but again, because he played all the time, his total numbers will jump you up. And this ties us back into the, if you listen to yesterday's show, back into the Mikal Bridges discussion. Because people talk, I'll take Mikal Bridges as in the first round because he never gets hurt, and if I include turnovers, he's like the 9th ranked player after the trade, all that sort of stuff. But that means you've got to have the same energy for Kevin Huerter, whose 9-cat total value for the season was 53rd. Will you take him round 5 because of that? Because he played 75 games? Would you take him there? Yeah, his 9-cat totals is 53. His 8-cat per game is 109. It's a 50-spot difference. Like, would you be, again, and if you don't want to use that same logic around, would I take Sabonis top 5? Would I take Bridges first round? Would I take Huerter in the 50s? Like, if you don't want to say, well, I wouldn't, no way I'd take a Huerter in the 50s, then I don't see how that logic applies across the board to other players. We'll talk about it with some other guys as well. He was great. He stayed relatively healthy. He did have a hamstring injury in the middle of the season. I thought they rushed him back a little bit too early from it. He only ended up missing 7 games, but he played through all of that. He only played 29 minutes. So for a guy that started, and this was the case with a lot of their guys, Mike Brown had no problem benching players. You haven't got to go and you're playing 22 minutes. You haven't got to go and you're playing 12. You have got it going, you're playing 35. He averaged 15 points with 2.7 triples, 3 rebounds, 3 assists, a steal, 49% shooting, 73 from the line, 40 from 3. Fantasy-wise, 109th is great. His positive category is threes, with steals about average, with field goal percentage about average, and below average free throws, blocks, assists, rebounds, and points. He was solid. I wouldn't draft him in the top 100 because what's going to change here? Yeah, he could play more minutes. Absolutely he could. He could play 31, 32 more minutes. He might get 17 points, 3 threes. But in terms of the ball handling responsibilities he had in Atlanta, they weren't here really with this team because Fox and Sabonis did it all. So while he was really good, his advanced stuff is pretty strong. We saw big improvements. You can see on that Darko graph how good he was. He was really good. But also, he was, if you look at this next graph, unbelievably inconsistent. Look at the ups and downs in the Reds and in the Blues. So it wasn't just inconsistent game to game. It was like, oh, no, you're a bench now. We're going to close with Monk. We're going to try Terence Davis. We're going to try Davion Mitchell. The consistency wasn't there, and that's always a frustrating thing in fantasy, and it was a problem with a lot of the Kings guys. His advanced stuff was pretty solid. He was really good. You probably thought that he played more than 30 minutes a game, but he didn't, and that leads me to problems, again, a little bit in the future. We did it once. Let's do it again. The pencil Harrison Barnes. Barnesy. Again, if you're going to take Mikal Bridges at pick 9, pick 12 because of totals, are you going to take Harrison Barnes in round 7? Because he finished 87th in totals. That's 8 cat totals. He finished 50th. No, he didn't. Wrong player. He finished 78th. That's 7th round in 9 cat totals. But he's nowhere near valuable enough to be a 12-team league player. He played all 82 games at age 31, 146th per game. He had an ADP of 105, which was obviously insane at the time. He played 33 minutes with 17 usage, 15 points, 4.5 boards, 1.6 assists, 1.6 threes, 0.7 steals, 0.1 blocks. They're one of the worst shot blocking players in the NBA. 47, 37, 85. 144th in Darko, 82nd percentile EPM. All really solid stuff. All really solid production. But for fantasy, there's nothing good here. Is there even one category in the counting stats which is above average? Nope, there's not. The only category where Harrison Barnes is above average is free throw percentage. It's the only category. Oh, yes, is it? Let me double check that. Yep. It's his only positive category. Only where he is above average is free throw percentage. And he's 31. He's an unrestricted free agent. He got bogansed in the playoffs. He struggled a lot. And he's just never going to be a 12-team league guy again. Look at all of the red lines above the blue on this points graph. That is signifying he is significantly not a point per minute player. He played tons. 33 minutes, 82 games. That is why his total numbers are so high. But at age 31, that doesn't really mean that much. We're not even age 31. He's just, the production's not that exciting. And I think we're going to see whatever team he goes to, he won't, or if he's back on this team, he probably won't play 33 minutes next season. In fact, I think it'll be well down. And I don't think he's going to be, he's barely top 150 this season. I don't think he's going to be anywhere near that next season. If you look at his EPM graph, it was still all right, but some peaks in the middle, drops in there, still solid, still really useful, still helpful. But for fantasy purposes, the value's not really there. And that brings us to young Harrison Barnes, and that's Keegan Murray. Now, admittedly, it's always important to understand biases. I'm going to continue to say this. I did not like the Kings picking Keegan Murray at number 4. I had Keegan Murray around 7 to 8. I did my redraft last week, and I had him, I think, at 8 again. Right? I don't think that he is super, super valuable. But drafting Keegan Murray at pick 4, he slotted in. He started almost every game apart from this stupid KZ Okpala thing to begin the season. He played 30 minutes a night. He set the record for the most threes as a rookie. I know he did. That's a fantastic achievement. He did that. But I still don't see star upside with him. He is going to be 23 at the beginning or towards the beginning of next season. During the first month or so of the season, he's going to be 23. So he's obviously a lot older as a rookie. He was obviously a lot older as a rookie. a lot of what he did at Iowa, which is big defensive stats and huge usage, had no real translation across into the NBA, and I think we saw that. He was 147th in per game value, but 96th in totals because he played, again, 80 games. 166th in points leagues. He had an ADP of 96, which I was probably guilty of looking at him around 100, which is obviously too high. We thought he would play a sizable role. I thought he'd play more than this because I didn't have any faith in KZ Okpala or whoever the hell else they were going to play it for. They didn't have any forwards. But he still only played 30 minutes with 16 usage. He averaged 12 points. 2.6 triples, really strong. But then everything else is Barnes-esque. 4.6 rebounds, 1.2 assists, 0.8 steals, 0.5 blocks. To be fair, 0.5 blocks is 5 times as many blocks as Barnes had. Still not numbers that move the needle for us. 45% shooting, 41 from 3. That's excellent. 77 from the line. Pretty good. That Darko graph is doesn't paint a great sign, does it? 251st in Darko. He was a negative in EPM. 62nd percentile. He was 25th percentile compared to starters on LeBron. Not great. But in saying all of this, it sounds like it's shit on Keegan time. I think he's a really, really useful, a really valuable player. Star? No. I don't think that. I don't think he will be. I don't think he is. I don't think he will be. Things can happen. That can change really easily. I just don't see it for him. But if they do move on from Harrison Barnes, or even if they don't and Barnes is brought back, I expect that Murray and his 16 or 15.7% usage jumps to 17, 18% usage, takes a little bit away from Barnes. And Barnes' 33 minutes become Murray's 33 minutes. And Barnes takes Murray's 30 minutes, which would push him from 12 points to 15 points and maybe 3 threes and maybe 5.5 rebounds. My worry overall with the fantasy stat set is like rebounds, assists, steals, blocks are all really low. Usage is low. Field goals and free throws are below average. I expect they bump up. He's going to be a draftable player. I won't be as high on him as others are. I know that. He had some shaky moments in the playoffs. He had some good moments in the playoffs. All of this is true. My opinion in him, upside-wise, longer term, still hasn't changed. I still think he's that sort of guy who's a really valuable type of player, but I don't think he's ever going to blow up from a fantasy perspective. He also copped a lot of those Mike Brown hooks. You started over 4, cool, now you're playing 20 minutes tonight. And that hurt him. So I think in year 2, he will play 32, 33 minutes. And he will probably look more like that ADP of 96 than his rank of 147 this season. He will improve, I expect. But I also think that a lot of the framework of him as a fantasy player we saw this season is probably not going to alter significantly as we move forward. Yes, usage up. Yes, efficiency will jump. But the rebounds, the assists, the steals, and blocks, I don't really have much confidence in that. The encouraging thing with Murray is the way that his impact numbers increased in the playoffs. Even though there were a few iffy games, he was better there. So that's an encouraging thing. And I do think that some of that transitions or translates to looking at him as a guy that's going to switch that Barnes role. Play more minutes than Barnes, regardless if Barnes is back. Transition into that third guy, or fourth guy, I guess, because Huerter and Monk are the third and fourth offensive options a lot of the time. But going to be good, going to be better. Still not super high on him, but he's going to be better. Let's talk about Malik Monk, who, interesting, was drafted in leagues. 140 was his ADP, only 8% of leagues. He's finished 149th in category leagues. He too played a million games, 77 of them. 22 minutes a night, 26 usage, 13 points, 2 threes. 2.6 rebounds is really bad, but 4 assists. Interesting, more assists than Kevin Huerter. Steals and blocks, forget about him. 45 from the field, 36 from 3, 89 from the line. That's all really, really good. You can see his impact numbers. Last season was a renaissance for him with the Lakers. He was able to maintain that for them. For the Kings, it did drop a little bit. He was, again, a victim of the Mike Brown, we'll figure it out on the day in terms of minutes and rotations. It's not a criticism of Mike Brown. It's just the way he did it. And he had all these different options of Monk and Huerter and Murray and Barnes and Mitchell and Davis. He could just switch them all around. And he did. So Monk only played 22 minutes. I don't think that he's in line to start at all. Although, if Barnes is limited, they could start Monk and Huerter at the 2 and the 3 with Murray at the 4. Now, of course, that leaves their bench empty because Monk was serving basically as the backup point guard and the scoring option off the bench. So if he did start, that 26 usage wouldn't stick at all. He'd be at 21, 22. Or the impact on Huerter and Murray would be significant. in terms of their usage going down even further. Advance-wise, he was pretty good. LeBron didn't love him. Darko's all right with him, 191. You can see like he got back up to a neutral player in Darko and then dropped off to be a little bit of a negative. He's still really good. He's 25. There is some value in him being a streamer, but unless there are big changes to this roster, I don't really see why he would be a 12-team target. His fantasy points graph doesn't really tell us a huge amount here, and his impact on EPM graph was pretty solid, right across the board. Nice numbers, just a really strong season, carrying over from his season in LA. A different type of season for sure, playing more of a backup, more of a point guard role. I love his playmaking ability that he showed this season, but inconsistency, minutes inconsistency, production inconsistency, and role inconsistency seem to hamper him, and I'm not sure that goes away. Let's talk Trey Lyles. A lot of Kings fans were massively big on this guy this season. Huge. I love Trey Lyles as a player, but to be fair to him, he did improve significantly this season. He was able to turn himself into a player who was able to play some center. He had a little stretch in the middle of the year where he was blocking everything, and of course that didn't stick. It's Trey Lyles. But it made him useful for a little period of time for fantasy. But he ended up 258th despite playing 17 minutes. He's 28. He's an unrestricted free agent. I don't think you want to go into his season with him as a starter. So other teams, I don't think they're looking at that. You're okay with him as your backup center? Well, I guess so, but they went away from that, and they put Alex Len into that role. So in the end, he's probably a backup 4, and then that's, again, going to turn into, does he come back? Does Barnes come back? What are his minutes like? He averaged 7 points, 4 rebounds. I know someone called me out, man, are you going to admit that you're wrong on Trey Lyles? Like, not really. He averaged 7 and 4 with half a steal and half a block. Like, is that good? Not really. Like, it's fine. He improved. Absolutely he did. But he improved to be a backup level player. You can see his Darko graph. He had a little stretch early in his career where he was pretty strong and then dropped way off, and he's been improving. He was dreadful last season when he played for the Pistons. He's definitely better than that. He was one of the worst players to watch in the NBA last season. This season, he improved. He was actually 49th percentile EPM, 40th percentile LeBron, which is better than like a Keegan Murray, which is interesting. And he was good. He doesn't really have upside to improve from this, though. Like, he's not going to be well. Now we go, look at that, Trey Lyles, Renaissance, age 28, let's start him and play him 30 minutes a night. I don't see that happening. He can have occasional big games, and then the games where he goes missing and they bench him and they put someone else in. You can see that little stretch in the middle of the season where he had a couple of really strong games, those big blue spikes, but I guess the problem always is that when you have those big games and then you don't really show any ability to sustain it, that's where you go, well, the coach doesn't have the trust in you, your inconsistency is a real problem, and that's a lot of it is what separates the great players from the good players from the bad players, is that can you just do it all the time? Or can you occasionally do the big performance? That's what separates it. He also struggled a lot towards the end of the season. His impact EPM metric dropped quite a lot. In the playoffs, it dropped off a lot as well. Terence Davis is a interesting player, a shit bloke, but a guy that can produce. The problem is, on this team, there is no role for him. He was 305th in per game value. He only played 64 games. 20. That's not because of injury necessarily. It's because of rotation. Some of it was injury. 26 years of age, 13 minutes, 22 usage, 7 points, 1.4 threes, 0.7 steals. 0.7 steals in 13 minutes, really good, really good. 42% from the field, 37 from 3, 79 from the line. Now, while he's got some questionable off-court things, which was part of the problem with him in Toronto, with some domestic violence accusations and charges, which I believe were dropped. But what he's able to do as a player, inconsistency is a problem. But with Monk, Huerter, Murray, Mitchell, Fox, with these guys all around, there is no regular rotation spot for Davis. Now, it could change, of course, if Barnes is gone and Murray moves from a wing into exclusively a 4. But if I'm other teams, I think Terence Davis can be, the way that Malik Monk was then able to break out the last 2 seasons, I actually think Davis can become an interesting player. I would put the chances of it happening at less than 5%. But when you compare him to like Keon Ellis on this team, like Keon Ellis got 0% chance of doing it. That's maybe an unfair comparison to Keon. But I think there is a lot here still with Davis. You got to really start to hit on it soon. But there is a lot here still. So I'm not giving up on him completely. For a guy that played 13 minutes a night, his advanced numbers are all pretty solid. And he's like, in these Darko numbers, had real stretches of being a positive player. I am really I don't think he's ever going to get a solid enough role to do it. But I think there's something there with Terence Davis if that role was to arise. I just don't see how that role arises on this squad. You can see the stop-start nature of his season with all these gaps in this graph. And you can see those blue dots there as well on the EPM graph. Like, again, but just a positive contributor lots of times. Wouldn't say this guy was a positive contributor all the time, and that's Davion Mitchell, who was 328th in category league. Somehow he was drafted in 11% of leagues at 143. That made no sense. People really, really looked at the last 2 weeks of the season before where Fox was out and he was playing big minutes and put up okay numbers. And they thought, oh, cool. We'll play in big minutes. And I was very skeptical because I didn't like him as a top 10 draft pick. I didn't like him as a player last season, and I definitely don't like him as a fantasy asset moving forward. And while people will say this is a very disappointing season from Mitchell, I would say it's almost in line with my expectations. I don't have high hopes for him. He is going to be 25, I think November, December. So again, really old as a second-year player. He showed he has an ability to be a really unbelievably good defender. The problem is he is so small. The offense just isn't there enough. He had a 14 usage as a guard. That's just not good enough. He averaged 2 assists per game in 18 minutes. He averaged 0.6 steals in 18 minutes. Not great numbers. He shot 32 from 3. At least he hit his free throws. But his advanced numbers, Darko, 312th. Like, big negative player. 9th percentile LeBron, bad. 43rd percentile EPM, pretty bad. I just do not look at Davion Mitchell as a future starter at all in his career. I don't even think that if he was a future starter, that he'd be even cracking through the top 70 in fantasy. There's just too many downsides to his game. Shooting, usage, good defender, but are the defensive stats going to always be super high? I don't know. And I just worry that some of his size and offensive limitations always limits his overall minutes upside. So while it was disappointing for many with Davion, this is, again, sort of why I didn't like him as a draft play. This is more in line with my expectation of him. Excellent defender. No one denies it whatsoever. But overall, like, he's a backup, I think. And not even like a Tyus Jones level backup point guard. Is that harsh on him? Maybe. It probably is. But I think at times, not you have to be harsh. I do like his shoes he's wearing. I've got a pair of those, the KD3s. Nice. You don't have to be harsh, but I think you've got to be realistic when assessing players. And I just don't see it with him at all. You can see that red line on his points graph is above the blue, so always more minutes than points, which is never a great thing either. And his EPM, he did have some moments in the playoffs for sure where he was guarding Steph, and it's great. We love watching that level of defense. But for us, fantasy-wise, and even as an NBA team, you don't want to entrust running an offense to Davion Mitchell. And when you're going to be 25 already, the clock is ticking. Let's talk about Chimezie Metu. I'm not going to talk about every player in this team. I'll tell you who I'm not going to go into detail in. I'm not going to talk about Rashawn Holmes, who's going to be 30. I think he might be done. I'm not going to talk about Alex Len, Keon Ellis, or Neemias Queta. Queta's an interesting one, but it needs a lot to clear out there. Len, Metu need to probably go for him to jump into a role. I think that they would be hoping to bring Alex Len back on a small contract and have him as the backup center. Again, I think he was good, but he is also 30. So for our view of him moving forward or dynasty upside, there's nothing there for Len. But there's a little bit with Metu, who's 26, 351st in category leagues. He played 10 minutes a game in 66 games. 5 points, 3 rebounds, 58% shooting, 59% actually, 74 from the line. The advanced stuff was all right. You can see consistent improvement across his Darko graph, which is something you always want to see. But the worry I guess I have with Metu is that he was phased out of the rotation at the end of the season for Alex Len. You can see on this graph how he had that little injury in the middle of the year, came back, and then everything started to trend down and he was done. He was out of the rotation. And that's a worry. I do like him as a backup big man, but with Holmes there, with Len maybe coming back, with Queta, I don't know if they bring him back, and with Sabonis ahead of him, like there's just no real upside there. I'm not ruling him out to be a 18-minute-a-night player. He was 10 this season. I would say it's pretty unlikely that he gets there, though. And the last guy we're going to talk about is Kessler Edwards, who they got in a trade before really the trade started around deadline time. It was a few weeks before that, I think. And I don't know why Brooklyn just gave up on him. Now, nothing about his numbers will get you excited. 436th in category leagues. He's 23 soon. 35 games, 11 minutes, 3 points, 0.4 steals in 11 minutes, 30% from 3, 39 from the field. Nothing's good there at all. EPM had him 38th percentile. Darko's got him really low, 357th in the NBA. But improvement. Solid improvement, slow improvement. But what is he overall? A 6'9" wing who can defend a little bit. Defend actually pretty well. He can shoot a little bit. They started him at times this season as well. There was a time when like Huerter was injured, they'd start him and go with like him, Murray, and Barnes together. They have a team option. I think they'll bring him back. I think he can work into being a rotation player. Now, this 436th in fantasy doesn't matter for anybody. No leagues really care about that. But if he was able to have a top 250 season, 2 or 3 of them, as a 17-minute-a-night reserve, I think that's legitimate. I think Edwards has got something there. It was a bit of a lost season for him because when we get to the graph, you'll see he never played. In Brooklyn, he never played. And he got to Sacramento, and he did. I wouldn't say he played super well, but he played. And you can see all those blue dots on the EPM graph. And then he gets the dotted line in the middle there is the trade. Played a few games, but then really started to have some solid enough impact and played minutes in the playoffs. 6'9" forwards. Think Trey Murphy, but worse. 6'9" forwards who can defend and shoot. Theoretically shoot, which is where we're at with Kessler. It can be really, really useful. Not saying he's great. Not saying we need to go and acquire him. But if I was them, I'd be bringing him back and at least counting on maybe as an 11th man and seeing what can come from that. I don't really have much hope for Rashawn Holmes, as I just said. I know he's been a fantasy guy for a few years and people loved him, but I think that's done. I think he's cooked. Follow this podcast, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Odyssey. If you're on YouTube, thumb it up, leave your comments down below. Thanks, everyone. If you are watching this every day and listening every day, you're part of the Everydayer squad and you're going to get, I think, entertainment and knowledge. And this week, we're going to have a Grizzlies preview tomorrow. First mock draft coming straight after the NBA lottery, which is going to be sick. And then some draft analysis stuff and more team previews. Great week coming up. Follow the podcast, Apple Podcasts. I think I said that already. But if you're on YouTube, you leave a comment down below, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.